we're continuing to follow the latest on the sex trafficking trial of Diddy Combs. Testimony expected to resume shortly here inside that court as we are nearly halfway through week 3 of the trial. One of Diddy's former top aides testified Tuesday that the hip-hop mogul threatened to kill her on her first day on the job and kidnapped her at gunpoint as he sought to kill rapper Kid Cudi. Capricorn Clark was the former global brand director for Diddy's Bad Boy Entertainment. Prosecutors working here to prove that he led a racketeering conspiracy that spanned 2 decades, relying on bodyguards, death threats, and a code of silence among frightened employees. Clark's testimony came days after Kid Cudi testified that Clark called him from a car outside of his home in December 2011 and told him that Diddy, angered because Cudi was dating his ex, Cassie Ventura, had kidnapped her and forced her to ride with him to Cudi's home. Prosecutors also allege that Diddy forced female victims into drugged-up, elaborately produced sexual performances in events that were dubbed, quote-unquote, freak-offs. I do want to bring in a friend of the show here, David Seltzer, the managing partner at Seltzer Mayberg, also the former prosecutor in Miami-Dade, Florida. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us, as always, and help break down all the latest developments.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And Capricorn Clark, that was big testimony that came yesterday. How pivotal is what she had to say when you look at the case as a whole?
You know, her testimony was damning to the defense because she portrayed Mr. Combs as a monster, someone who not only threatened violence, but actually used violence to get his way, if you believe her testimony and find her credible. She was able to tie in some key evidence that the government's been missing to date for racketeering. But if you look at it from the other side, she also left some really big holes and unanswered questions for the defense to extort. The defense is not shying away from the violence of Mr. Combs and the personality that he was. Ms. Clark left a lot of curious issues, like why are we now, after Mr. Cudi already testified, hearing for the first time about this supposed car chase involving Mr. Combs and Mr. Cudi? Why was that not raised in his testimony? Also, she stated that while she was kidnapped, she went home every night. So is she testifying to check a box for the government to use the word kidnapping, or really was it false imprisonment, and is she embellishing her testimony? And unfortunately, we don't know. That's only a question the jury can answer.
But I have to ask how all of this really factors into the sex trafficking and racketeering charges in general.
So in my opinion, they don't. It continues to be outside the scope. Kidnapping, while a crime, is not a crime of racketeering unless it reaches the overarching elements to prove racketeering. Here, it's not related to sex trafficking or commercial profit. She testified she was kidnapped because of some missing jewelry. Now, that doesn't lead to racketeering. So far, all we're seeing is the government portraying individual crimes, domestic violence, kidnapping, other relevant crimes, but in and of itself don't reach to the commercial profit enterprise of racketeering.
We know there's been a lot of talk about these non-disclosure agreements, the NDAs that have been signed, specifically in connection with these quote-unquote freak-offs that have been reported. So I'm hoping you can kind of provide some clarity, because a question that we've received a lot from people out there, do the NDAs hold up when you're talking about a trial? If you signed an NDA, can you reveal kind of the information that you're not supposed to reveal if you are in a courtroom and you're being questioned by prosecutors?
So yes, NDAs are non-disclosure agreements. In layman's terms, they mean you can't disclose or repeat what you've heard or learned about a specific matter. However, there are exceptions to NDAs, and a subpoena, which is compulsory testimony, is an exception to an NDA. And therefore, when subpoenaed, you can testify against an NDA and not be in violation of the NDA.
There's a lot of questions here as well about who else is going to testify. There's other big names that could come up. What are the options if, let's say, Jennifer Lopez comes up? She's subpoenaed. Can she choose not to go and testify?
Well, there are lots of names floating out there and more celebrities that we may see, but we don't know who they will testify or call. However, if you are subpoenaed, you are compelled to testify unless that testimony will be incriminating and force you to incriminate yourself. So at that point, you can assert your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Otherwise, as a witness, you cannot decline, and you could be held in contempt if you refuse to testimony. However, as a prosecutor, if you have a witness who doesn't want to testify, it is not a good look to have a hostile witness, someone who is adverse to your line of questioning. But sometimes it's a necessary evil as a prosecutor to get your point across. As a defense attorney, most of our witnesses are hostile, so it's nothing new to us.
And you are taking a live look right here. This is outside of the courthouse. I always mention it, but cameras are not allowed inside, but reporters are. However, we have this camera outside the Manhattan courthouse, as sometimes we get people entering or leaving, and there are just a few news conferences that are sometimes held as well. We've also learned from Fox 5 New York that prosecutors in the Diddy trial expecting to call 4 more witnesses, and that includes another alleged victim. If Diddy were a lesser known figure, how could this case maybe look a little different than it does right now?
I mean, first and foremost, if Mr. Combs was not a media mogul, there wouldn't be a media circus surrounding the case. Diddy is a worldwide phenomenon, and everyone wants to see how the story ends. It's like watching a thrilling movie, and we're all waiting to see where the next twist or turn is going to come. So if he wasn't anybody important, this would be a case that would just go by the seat of the pants, and nobody would be paying attention.
Prosecutors have alleged that Combs led this decades-long racketeering conspiracy that was backed by threats and violence. So what elements actually, and you and I have discussed this, but what elements for folks out there have to really be proven at this point by the prosecutors?
So, racketeering is a complicated charge to prove. It's a series of illegal activities aimed at commercial profit, and that's the key word, commercial profit, that may be disguised as legitimate business deals. Racketeering is also coordinated by multiple people, and what the jury might have a hard time finding is right now they're just dealing with Mr. Combs. No one else is on trial. So the government must prove the following 3 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. The first is at least 2 acts of racketeering were committed within a period of 10 years. And you keep hearing this long period of time, so they're going to hit that element. But the second is that the acts of racketeering were related to each other, meaning that there was a relationship between or among the acts of racketeering. And thirdly, that the acts of racketeering amounted to or posed a threat to continued criminal activity. Again, we're not hearing commercial profit. We're not hearing multiple people. So far, we're not hearing that these acts are related. They seem to be isolated incidents of domestic violence, kidnapping for jewelry. The government is really trying to pull here something, a real stretch to try and get this into racketeering.
The last question here, as of course we are waiting for that testimony to resume. I keep saying it, but cameras not allowed inside. Reporters are, though. So that's how a lot of the information is coming in real time here. Our very own Mike Page has been providing updates on our YouTube page. One question that's been brought up a lot is how could this potentially lead to maybe other possible alleged victims coming forward, not in this case, but in other similar cases that are about high-profile figures?
Well, unfortunately, the answer, I think, depends on who wins. If Mr. Combs is found not guilty, then it will cause victims to remain silent, as they will fear that powerful individuals can get away with their crimes and they won't be protected. But on the other side, if Mr. Combs is found, if the government is successful, excuse me, victims of abuse will feel empowered and will come forward because they are being heard and their voices matter. Either way, it's unfortunate, as no one should feel as though they don't have a voice. While it may be hard, there's always someone who wants to help.
All right. David Seltzer there, managing partner over at Seltzer Mayberg. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
You know, Clark's testimony was interesting. She appears to be an opportunistic person. She clearly demonstrated she had different sides on the stand, while for the government and the defense. But she left a lot of holes for me in her credibility of what she clearly wants. She clearly wants to live that fame lifestyle. She worked for Mr. Combs several times. As recently as a year ago, she tried to work for him again. To me, that calls into question everything she testified as an attack on her judgment, because she also muddied the waters with the lines between what is business and what is personal. And that's a big issue to prove RICO.
Who would you say was the most, and this is kind of a tough question to answer, but I want to get your take as a legal expert here. When you have Cassie Ventura's testimony there versus maybe Capricorn Clark, how do they weigh in importance? Because I have to imagine Cassie Ventura's testimony is probably up here when you talk about it.
Well, Ms. Ventura's testimony was key because she was their key witness and put forth the brunt of what she's trying to prove for RICO purposes. But I think to date, Clark's testimony, excuse me, was the most damning for the defense because she tried to tie in some real key elements. So if you look at who's the better witness right now, I think it's Ms. Clark.
All right. Thank you so much, David Seltzer, as always, for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
You too.